Welcome everyone to the Write Your First or Next Book Masterclass series to help you keep your butt in the chair, write and revise your fiction or memoir, and send it off for publication. I'm Traci Skuce, writer, story midwife, and founder of The Writing Journey, and I help writers write and finish their best stories so they can get them out into the world. And I'm excited to introduce you today to Jane Brunette. Jane teaches and writes about meditation, spirituality, and creating a soulful life in challenging times, in which we're living right now. She created Writing from the Soul, an approach to writing that has sprouted groups around the world, and she mentors individuals in writing and spiritual practice. Trained in psychotherapy and as a Buddhist teacher with a deep affinity for Christian mysticism and indigenous perspectives, she has traveled widely to challenge her social conditioning, living simply in cultures where this is still possible to free her time and her mind for contemplation and retreat. A Nautilus Book Award winner for her novel, Lineage of the Trees, she has also published 2 collections of poetry, Cartoon Kali and Grasshopper Guru. Her websites are writingfromthesoul.net and flamingoseed.com. Welcome, Jane.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I'm getting everyone to tell us about their writing journey, and I'd love to hear about yours.
Okay, well, I have loved stories since I was a child and was an obsessive story reader, and then became telling them and then started writing them when I was very small. So naturally, like most people, it made me think that the only thing I wanted to do was write books. And since our culture is all about how you make money, I thought that I would write books to make money. I mean, it's logical, right?
Yeah.
So I did the usual thing when I was young. I started writing my stories and sending them to literary magazines, and then going to conferences when I got a little older. And even when I first started, I remember my very first publication, because I was so obsessed with this. I was pretty good at it, and I got published pretty fast. And that was lucky, because what I learned was it was a big letdown. So it was like, I thought this would be like the day that I would be jumping up and having champagne. But it's like, so what? This thing comes in the mail. My story's in it. It's a story I wrote last year. I don't even care about this story anymore. It's like, this is what people do this for? And but I kept going because you're supposed to, right? And I just kept going to the conferences, and then I'd go to a conference and everybody would read their story to all these other people who didn't know them. And then I swear, it seemed to me that the criticism was all off the mark, overzealous and off the mark. People are trained from going to school to look for what's wrong in writing. I mean, what happened to us as children? They send it back to us red marks. So it was very disillusioning, actually. And I'm not saying all of this to discourage people by any means, because what happened for me was, as I was getting more and more of a sense of something's off here, I went to a writer's conference, and there was a writer there who I really admired. She was a literary writer, and she got her first story published in the New Yorker. And so I took a workshop with her, and at the end of the workshop, she offered to mentor me. She said, your work has promise, and this was exciting, right? Your work has promise, and I want to help you write a New Yorker story. And I said, what's that? And she said, she says, this is how I got published. She said, I went in, I looked at the magazine, I analyzed all the stories to see what the editor was looking for. I made a chart. I kept rewriting my story until it matched it. Then I sent it in. The editor liked it. She sent it back. I did this 20 times, and then that was my first publication. And she says, it'll be much easier for you because I've done all the research. And something in me just was like, I felt like this was a deal with the devil, I'm just like, really? And she's like, yeah, and you can do exactly the same thing, and I'll mentor you, and you'll get published in the New Yorker, and you'll have a literary career. It was just like that.
Right.
And I took her information, and I never contacted her. And in fact, what that did for me was that made me realize the light bulb went off, and I said, this is not why I do this. This is the last thing I need, is to suddenly get these accolades for doing something that isn't me, that didn't come out of me. So I stopped publishing altogether. I just dropped out of the literary world and I started saying, how can I start to write the way I started as a child? Out of joy, out of enthusiasm, out of what wanted to arise out of me naturally. How can I go back to that? And so I spent a long time in a discovery process, finding out how to do that. And now that's what I'm sharing. I'm sharing what I discovered in that process. When I came out, I started publishing. And again, but I'm not publishing according to what anybody else wants. I publish what came out of me, and if it wants to be read, people will read it. And that's how I've gone about it.
So that's interesting, that reconnection, or it's not interesting, but it's just it's quite beautiful, that reconnection with that joyful. I'm really hearing that a lot, it's like, how do we reconnect with that joy and express from that place? And not that it's all happy writing, but that the expression is joyful, and the process is joyful, and then the book is like a byproduct
Exactly.
of that, and whether it happens or not. And one of the things that we talked about in our earlier conversation was that you have people come to you who want to write a book, and then they start going through the process and they realize something different. So maybe you could share a little bit about
Sure.
that.
This happens often. People come to me and they'll say, this thing happened to me. I want to write a memoir about it because I think it will help other people. Or, I've had this story in my mind forever that I want to write. And so they come and the first thing they want to do is have me criticize their chapter and help them outline it and help them put down a plan and all of this kind of thing. And so then I say, well, before we do this, why don't we do some writing from the soul? And it doesn't usually take very many sessions, sometimes only 2. That was the last one. It took 2. Sometimes it takes 3 before oftentimes people realize they don't want to write a book. And what they want to do is engage with this deep material in a very deep way and take it off of the goals. And I just want to tell a quick story about a good friend of
Yeah,
mine,
please do.
because this is totally in line with this. She's a really great writer, and she was already plugged into the publishing world, and so her father died in this very unusual way, or her father had this accident where his personality changed. And so she decided that she would write about this because it was so profound for her. And so she started to work on this book. But when she did, the first thing she did was make an outline, get an agent, had this beautiful proposal, and it was like accepted almost immediately because she did it so well. And now she's writing this book, and she's got an editor in New York saying, when are you going to have a couple chapters for me? And now she's going into this deep process around her relationship with her father, around her feelings about him getting sick and then dying. All of this intense stuff is coming up for her, and she's having to produce these chapters that are going to sell for a New York publisher. She wrote 8 chapters, and she almost had a nervous breakdown trying to get it together. And she finally just called her agent and said, I want out of the contract. And she canceled, she got herself out of the contract, and she could breathe again. And the thing is, she's never published that book because once she stopped, she realized that she had started writing it before she'd processed anything. And by the time she started to go through it, she realized she would write a totally different book. So even though there were good chapters, she wouldn't want it published. And that was, and then she realized she was too private a person to do that anyway. So she just gave up on the whole project. Now, she's written a lot of other things that she wrote for publication, but that one was not meant for publication. And sometimes the thing that we most want to write, we think we have to want to publish it in order for it to be legitimate. And yet for her, the most important thing needed to stay private. And that doesn't make it any less legitimate that she write about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about that. Writing as an expressive art versus not versus, I don't want to put them in 2 different camps, but that the emphasis, like that story really emphasizes this idea of product, but the process to get to a work of great meaning for the writer, is really the value in my
Right.
opinion, right? It's like, and that may or may not end up published. So let's talk about that the expressive art of writing
Yes.
versus this kind of goal oriented, I guess.
Yeah, right. Well, I think it's fine to be goal oriented if you're going to write manuals, or if things like that, even if you want to just write really straightforward genre fiction and
Yeah.
just do it that way. But if you're doing anything that has to do with your interior, um, and I think it's true of every real, deep literary writer, writing is first a practice. It has to be a practice, and that's where it's a spiritual practice. It's a soul practice, really, because we're going into our depths with this.
Yeah.
We're doing an exploration and a discovery. So the first thing it is expression. And I like to think of, if anything comes out of it at the end, I think of that as an artifact from a process. It's really an artifact. And sometimes the artifact, if I write, let's say, either a book or a story or an essay or anything, I first write it to satisfy my own psyche. The next thing I do is look at it and say, would this be of value to anybody but me? And then I say, well, maybe I want to share this with a few close friends, but it's too personal for me to share it with anyone else. So I'll just write now. I'll make another alteration to this piece for my friends. Or maybe and then after I do that, I might say, well, maybe I will share this wider. But then I don't want to have this in the public, and I wouldn't talk about this if it was going out to a wider audience. So I'll do another version. So those are versions that I want to gift, basically, is how I
Right.
see it. Or I want to share because I want to share myself. But
Yeah.
but that's only going to be from the artifact. I've now got an artifact, but it was first for me.
Yeah.
And that to me is how real writing happens. Because otherwise, if we're writing and we're already thinking about publication, we're writing with internet trolls in our room. How are we going to do that? It's impossible.
So true. The critic has now become an internet troll. The inner critic has now become an internet troll.
Right.
Oh. Oh
Right.
my gosh, that's so great. I love this idea of the artifact, and I wonder if you would elaborate on that a little bit more to clarify what you mean, because I think I get it, but yeah.
Well, let me give you an example. I have a client who's a poet, and he's actually a really amazing poet. He's a very unusual person. He's very, he's just very fluid and kind of living in another kind of universe, as some poets do. And when he writes, he's writing from the unconscious. It's like incredible kind of links he's made, that sort of thing. And there are times when in his process, he's so inside of his own process that he'll put something in, and we'll be looking at his poem together, and he'll put something in and he'll talk about a red light all of a sudden. And I'd say, I don't really understand what this is. And then he'd say, oh, well, that was this one time I was taking this walk, and I was in the mountains, and I saw this red light in the distance, and it was kind of mysterious. And he tells me this story, and I go, oh, I can see why it goes here. And I said, but I don't get that. I said, do you think that's important enough for you to put in so I get it? Or do you think that you ought to just leave it as it is and let it be a mystery to me? Or do you think you want to take it out? Or do you think that you want to keep this poem so personal that you don't want to share it? So those are the decisions we're making.
Right.
Right. And that's how it's an artifact. He did this process, this thing was there, and then in the revision process, we're deciding those things, how much we want to change it to share. And so what's left is an artifact of our personal process. It's just something left over from it.
Right. Yeah.
That's all. With those little loose things hanging from it. And then maybe we'll make something else out of it.
Right.
But first of all, it's ours. And in and another example is my book. my novel, it just won an award, which I was kind of shocked by, because that book, the metaphors and everything in it are so personal to me that I thought, there was a part of me that thought, I don't know if anybody else will get it.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, there's a lot of archetypes in here, so if they'll get their own story. So, and I was right. People got their own story, but nobody read the story I wrote, because nobody knows what my associations are with everything in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're reading a different story, basically.
Well, I think that's true at any time, like we have no control as writers of how people are going to receive our work. Right. So I think you're right that the gift is our own process. Like I remember writing an essay, a personal essay, and at the end of it, it was something I needed to process, and at the end of it I just like lay on the floor and sobbed, and it was like this great kind of reconciliation in myself, and the essay went on to do really well. So it's just interesting. That's not why I did it for this, but for that healing that needed to happen through the writing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's really the gift.
And what's interesting about it is, like what you said, the healing happened, and something about letting yourself do that is probably why it was accepted, because people are looking for writers to tell the truth about things that are hard for people to access. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes that's what they're looking for.
So let's talk about that process that you help people through with your soul writing and that access to these deeper parts of ourselves.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, the process is basically a free writing practice, which a lot of people know about. And I started doing it long time ago, based on Natalie Goldberg's work.
Yeah.
When it first came out, actually, which dates me a little bit, but it's like, and then I started to experiment with it, and there were some discoveries I made. So this is a free writing practice, but there's a couple of things I discovered. One is that there's an essential attitude that you have to cultivate in order to make this work. And one of them is to see the writing as an artifact. You have to not have the trolls in the room with you. Things can't happen with that. So that's one. So there's a kind of it's getting cultivated, and there's a process of getting to where that field is natural to you, which is a spiritual process, really, and it's a discovery process. And that process is to do these writings and watch the judgments, watch the thoughts, and not only watch them but write them. When they come in, you write them right in the middle of what you're writing, oh, I might as well just stop doing this right now, this really sucks, and then keep going, right? So there's this quality of becoming aware of what has been installed in us, because these thoughts are not ours. These thoughts come from, going to school and all this other crap. And so we're deinstalling these crappy voices that got installed, so that we can free ourselves back to where we were as children, which is just having fun. Right. So that's a process, right? The second piece is, and this was like a very key piece for me, is I discovered that usually if you go to a writing circle, or if you go even to a free writing circle, or if you look at any books about free writing, they'll say something like, write about a time you felt courageous. So what's the first thing you have to do? You have to go in your head. Oh, when did I feel courageous? Oh, I did once when I was, that would be a dumb story to write. So there I am in my head thinking about when I felt courageous. Okay, and then I'm going to free write from starting in my head like that. So what I discovered is, instead of that, this is so simple. I just start a sentence like something as simple as, I felt courageous when, and all I do is finish the sentence. And so this is how I begin every free write. It's always half a sentence that I finish. And then what happens is I do it and it's not interesting to me. So I finish the sentence again and it's not interesting to me. And I finish the sentence again and it's not. I finish the sentence again, I write 3 sentences. It's not interesting to me. I finish the sentence again, and all of a sudden I got to something that was a little bit buried, and I want to write another sentence and then another sentence and then another sentence. And so I keep going. And so there's a digging, a discovery process that's happening, not with the intellect, but it's
Mhm.
like some other part of me is fishing around
Yeah.
for what would make sense to me. So that's what I do. There's two processes in there. One with this free write. It's a timed free write, but you always finish a sentence, and you always have what I call a wild card, which is I really want to write about, and you
Right.
finish that sentence. Because you can keep going with this courage thing until you realize you don't want to write about courage, you want to write about this.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
start writing about it. Yeah.
I
So
love that.
that's a big secret.
I love like I'm having the image of that combined with the artifact is like that archaeological digging, right?
Right.
You know, the layers of Troy. But you come, there's one city, and then there's another city, and then there's another city, and there's another. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And so the key, of course, is that you're not writing a piece, because you can spend the whole time and all you can do is write a list. You might never get to it.
yeah,
You know, and the timer goes off after 10 minutes. But usually in these writing groups, you're supposed to have a piece done. So you better settle on something,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so the idea is that we have complete freedom. We're just in a discovery process, and we're not writing pieces. Now, if a
Right.
piece comes out all by itself, that's fine. But it's completely not up to you. Yeah.
And what a relief.
No kidding. And this is where it gets fun if it's not up to you, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what play is. Play is a discovery process where things arise.
Mm,
And then there's an arising that happens from the blank page. And this is
mhm.
the other thing which is that oftentimes when we start writing, we're writing from our head. We're writing from where we're all filled up. I'm going to write all my opinions about this or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But underneath that is what is really the blank page, which is the silence. And
Mhm.
so if we want to get to something new, we have to actually contact that, not the page that has all the scribbles on it already.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So I mean, as someone who's practiced meditation and you're a meditation teacher and practitioner, that sounds like what meditation is, you know, like that.
exactly.
So it sounds like an application of those meditation. Um, I'm not gonna of what we touch into in meditation brought to writing. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and so could you talk about that intermingling? I mean, I know that the whole thing is a spiritual practice, but that intermingling of writing and spiritual practice.
Absolutely. Well, what happens is because I mean, that's been my main thing. I spend a lot of time just, going to places that are basically cheaper so that I could do retreat, right? Than the US. And so a lot of my writing, and actually all of my books have come out of meditation. I mean, they've
Mm,
come out of these long periods of being in retreat. So, and what the thing that makes it go there is to think of writing as more of a listening and a waiting than a
mm,
doing.
mhm,
Um, just like when you're meditating, there's there's a um, there's a practice I like to use before I start writing, which is just listening. So I'll sit and, let's say, settle myself into my body, and I recommend this for any writer. Um,
mhm,
and then I let myself settle a bit, and then I start listening just to the sounds in the room.
mhm.
Because if you do that for a little while, it actually opens up a certain kind of awareness, which is the awareness. It's sort of like a pregnant not doing.
Yeah.
You're just kind of there, but something's happening to your ears. That's all, right? And yet you're in relationship without having to do anything. And this is an approximation of where we want to be when we start writing. And
Mhm,
then we're listening into the silence between our thoughts, like really settling into the space. It's sort of like if you look at a painting and instead of looking at the figures, you look at the ground. This is where I like to start when I write, by looking at the ground and then getting myself there and then starting with the prompt. Because then there's a sense of something can emerge that's unknown, and I'm going into the unknown instead of into the known, as much as wants to be. you know?
Mhm, mhm.
And then there's a possibility you'll be surprised, which is always really fun when you're writing.
Well,
So it's the
yeah, I
opposite of
think
outlining your book.
I think I totally. I think of that space as really. I think a lot of us are in our culture, particularly full of distractions and so on, and noise,
Mhm.
are afraid of that silence.
Right.
And that as writers, as creative people, that's actually the fertile ground
Right. Exactly.
for our whatever expression that we, whether it's story or memoir or poetry, but that's, I mean, that's where the richness is. And I know you say in your bio about challenging social conditioning, and I think as writers we can write from a place of habit and what we have heard or been influenced by. So like, but to go into that silence is actually like fresh. It's some newer place.
It is. It is. And what you're really talking about here is starting to get comfortable with the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've learned from being a nomad and sometimes traveling where I lost my, the visa's running out, I don't know where to go next, my money's down, well, how do I choose? Is that the unknown is always kinder and far more benevolent than my imagination about it.
Mm.
Again and again. I'd go someplace because I thought it's a cheap place and I'll have internet. And then something amazing would happen there that I would have never planned. It happened to me again and again and again. I thought I was just going for practical reasons. So, so there's like, again and again, the unknown was giving me gifts. And this is the same thing, it's true when we're writing. So often, especially when people are starting out, they look at who did well and they want to imitate them or something.
Yeah.
And there really is nothing wrong with imitating somebody you admire. I mean, that's a really powerful way to find your own style. But if you stay on that level and never go into the silence and trust your own genius, because
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds like a crazy word, but I think there's genius in every one of us.
Sure.
The genius is that we're originals. So then there's a quality of like, once we do that, that blank piece of paper, like you said, it's a place of possibility. It's almost like, it's like a still lake that crazy fish are going to jump out of if we wait.
Or mythical creatures,
You
mermaids
got
and
it.
whatnot.
Right. Right.
And I
Yeah.
think of that, what you were saying about your novel, and like, are people even going to read, or even going to get this? And yet it spoke to them. I think it really, when we come from that place of trust and find our inner, or voice, or whatever you want to call it, um, that that's what's going to resonate with people.
Right.
And not everybody, and who wants to please everybody? That's impossible. But
Right. Right.
that to going back to that recognition that deep voice has a place in this world.
Absolutely. Yeah. What you just said reminds me of, there's this concept of original medicine that comes from it. Some indigenous people talk about it. Um, that everyone comes to the earth, they have an original medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And that medicine is like our unique view of things. And so just like some people need penicillin and other ones don't, they actually
Yeah.
need vitamin C. It's the same thing. That's how I think of it. And
Right.
sometimes I can write something and maybe there's only one person in the world it'll resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like someone having a rare disease and I have exactly the medicine that they need. Why
Yeah.
is that any less important, right? Than
Right.
reaching than being able to treat the common cold, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's a sense of actually valuing the preciousness of every expression because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I feel, especially people in our culture, the idea that the more you reach, the better it was. It's like,
Yes.
sometimes I don't think that's true at all. It's
Yeah.
better for one thing, but not better for another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we valuing, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I just heard an interview with writers who said, there's anyway, just like that we value the award-winning books, and then so many books get lost in the shuffle, like good books get lost in the shuffle or not heard. And it's that idea of, you know, reach. But I love
Right.
that our, sometimes I write a poem and I just send it to a small group of people. And it's so great, that's such a great way to publish your work. It's so fun and fairly immediate. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And the other great way of publishing that I just didn't mention, but something that I do with Writing from the Soul, is these circles where we create the atmosphere together and then reading it aloud, but reading it with no comments. So people are
Yes.
just taking each other in. And then this is sort of like liminal publishing. I think of it
Well,
as
I
liminal
love that.
publishing. It's perfect publishing. Because here's this thing that just sprouted off the top of your head. Nobody's going to mark it up with red. They're just going to take in what you're trying to say without telling you which adjective to use. And so there's like this kind of satisfaction in that. Incredible satisfaction. There'll never be more satisfying kind of publishing than that. And some people, once they discover that, they never even want, that's why they don't want a book published. It's like, this is what I needed. Not to
Yeah,
wait for
there's
all the critics to come back and tell me how my book sucked, you know?
there's such a beautiful energy exchange in that process for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah.
So Jane, I'm hoping you can tell people about your free gift.
My free gift. Okay. Well, I actually have 3 of them,
Oh.
and you can have all 3. So one is that I have an article, just a little guide I wrote called 3 Attitudes That Produce Soulful Writing. It's like just my little article, and you can download that, and that'll help you, because I think of the writing process as quite different. It involves absolutely no criticism, but that doesn't mean that you can't win an award. It's just that criticism isn't involved at all.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is the first chapter of my novel, which is you can download, and that is both a sort of memoir fiction. It's a melding of the 2 things that this is about, really, because it comes from my family history and it's a complete fictional story at the same time. So however that happened, that might interest you. And finally, I offer a free 30-minute consultation to anybody who's interested in working with me individually. So I have that. That's also on the same link.
Okay, so yeah, we'll put that link down below so everyone can access it, or people who are interested can access it. And I really encourage everyone to check out Jane's work and her blog. Is it on flamingoseed.com? Is that the one that the blog?
On Flaming Seed, yeah.
Flaming Seed.
Yeah.
Why did I say flamingo?
Right.
I don't know, like a bit.
Oh, I like that. That's very cool.
That's my artifact, flamingo seed.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's flamingoseed.com you can read some of Jane's great writing there. So you can check that out. So thank you, Jane.
It's at Flaming Seed. Yeah.
Flaming Seed. Yes, we'll put down the link. I will have the correct link down below. So thank you, Jane. Okay. Thank you, Jane, for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for coming and tuning in today. And please join us again tomorrow. Happy writing.